with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
Following his victory against George McClellan in the 1864 presidential election, Abraham Lincoln once again found himself leading a divided country. However, the division this time was not only between North and South, but also whether the Union should treat the rebel states with leniency or vengeance upon the conclusion of the conflict. This question had been a central element of the presidential campaign, and in his second inaugural address, delivered on March 4, 1865, Lincoln urged the weary country to see the war to its end and to embrace the return of the South magnanimously. Later that same month, Lincoln traveled to Virginia. After spending some time surveying the front around City Point, he convened a meeting between General Ulysses S. Grant, General William T. Sherman, and Admiral David Dixon Porter aboard the steamship called the River Queen. The High Command used this rare opportunity to discuss perhaps the most important issue of the war since its beginning, how it should come to an end. Rear Admiral Porter said of the meeting, quote, "I shall never forget that council which met on board the River Queen. On the determinations adopted there depended peace or continuation of the war with its attendant horrors." Lincoln was very clear. He wanted his generals to offer lenient terms of surrender to the Confederates. "Let them all go," he said, "officers and all. I want submission and no more bloodshed. Let them have their horses to plow with and, if you like, their guns to shoot crows with. I want no one punished. Treat them liberally all around." Although President Lincoln and General Grant were in agreement on this point, General Sherman wished to obtain the surrender of Confederate General Johnston on his own terms, potentially dragging out the war for another 2 weeks. Lincoln was insistent. Offer Johnston the same terms that will be offered to Lee. Then, if he is defiant and will not accept them, try your plan. Soon after this meeting, on April 1, 1865, the Confederate strongholds of Petersburg and Richmond fell. The following day, as Union troops marched on the capital city of the Confederacy, it was clear that the costliest war in American history would soon be over. On April 9th, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. Following this, on April 26, 1865, Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston surrendered his troops to General Sherman at Bennett Place in Durham, North Carolina, effectively ending the American Civil War. Per President Lincoln's wishes, the rebel states were shown immense leniency. Despite the loss of over 700,000 lives, those who had fought for the Confederacy were allowed to return home and were not to face prosecution or retaliation. General Lee was allowed to return to his home in Virginia. General Johnston would later serve as a member of the U.S. Congress and was even a pallbearer at the funeral of General William T. Sherman, the very man to whom Johnston surrendered in 1865. Although the war is perhaps best remembered for the actions of titans such as Lincoln, Sherman, Grant, and all of the generals whose likenesses are memorialized in this panel, it is only through the personal sacrifices of nearly every citizen of the Union, especially those who dutifully answered the call to arms, that this victory was made possible. As the dead were counted, the missing sought, and the living returned home, the country was left with an immense task before it, healing the nation's wounds. On July 4, 1894, at the monument's dedication, former Ohio Governor Joseph Foraker remarked, quote, "As the years go by, we shall forget the different regiments, brigades, divisions, corps, and in time, even the armies of the Potomac, the Cumberland, and the Tennessee. Only a few great names like those of Grant, Sherman, Sheridan, and Thomas will continue to enjoy individual renown. All the rest of that mighty host will become blended into a common rank to be remembered only as the great Union Army."